Welcome back, everyone, to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization Show, the home of Googlization Nation, where we talk with HR and business thought leaders about the crazy, never normal shift going on all around us. Our goal is to bring you ways to reimagine tomorrow and explore the ever-changing convergence of people, business, and technology. Here is your host, Ira Wolfe.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization Show. Thank you for being part of Googlization Nation. I'm Ira Wolfe. If you think this is just another podcast, think again. This is the voice of the most important conversations on the future of work confronting business leaders and people today. My goal is to bring you ways to reimagine tomorrow and explore the ever-changing convergence of business, people, and technology. In other words, to help you make sense of this messy, weird, unfamiliar, fascinating world that we seem to be careening toward. For today's episode, I've got two special guests, and what an awesome follow-up to last week's blockbuster conversation with David Wright and Jesse Paul from Headspace, who helped me kick off Mental Health Awareness Month. If you missed it, you can watch the replay on YouTube or listen wherever you listen to podcasts. Well, in just a few minutes, I will be joined by Holly Novak, Chief People Officer at Jack Henry Associates, and Mary Baird, Senior Leadership Development Strategist and Podcaster at The Simplifiers. I had the good fortune to meet both Holly and Mary at Ivanti Solutions Summit recently took place in Grapevine, Texas. The three of us were graciously invited by the Ivanti team to see the keynote addresses through the HR lens. First up was CEO Jeff Abbott. Jeff lifted the information embargo that morning from Ivanti's 2024 Everywhere Work report, which once again dropped a few bombshells about employee attitudes on Everywhere Work. Then futurist Samantha Radacchio, who goes by the stage name of Sam Rad, recapped how far our world has progressed and how quickly it's changing. What once took a millennia to complete the cycle now seems to happen in just a few years, if not months or just weeks. And the deepfake clone of herself, Sam 2.0, that she created during the pandemic lockdown just blew away the audience. I'll post a link to the keynotes in the show notes. Following the event, I invited both Holly and Mary to sit down with me to share their biggest aha moments, takeaways, and insights. So stay tuned, you don't want to miss it. But before I bring Holly and Mary to the Googlization stage, I want to thank Ivanti for once again sponsoring Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization, and remind you to download their 2024 of Everywhere Work report. You can just go to adaptabilitytoolkit.com/2024 Everywhere Work. That's adaptabilitytoolkit.com/2024 Everywhere Work. You can check the show notes too. Now it's time to welcome Holly, Novak, and Mary Baird to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization Show. Holly serves as the Chief People Officer at Jack Henry Associates, a prestigious S&P 500 fintech powerhouse. With a career spanning more than 2 decades in human resources, Holly's extensive expertise encompasses HR operations, business operations, HR business partner roles, recruitment, and HR information systems. She is especially renowned for her skill in coaching, executive compensation, people analytics, and leveraging HR tech to achieve organizational excellence, to mention a few things. Mary has an equally impressive resume. She's the CEO, Senior Leadership Development Strategist, and podcaster at The Simplifiers. She helps medium to large companies who are struggling with high turnover, low employee engagement, and are navigating an ever-changing work environment that seems everything but simple. Her LinkedIn profile seems to say it all. She has a knack for turning complex challenges into simple, actionable solutions. Let's give a big Googlization Nation welcome to Holly and Mary. Well, welcome Holly and Mary to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization Show. Great to have you.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure. Happy to be here.
It's been a few weeks since we had the opportunity to both to meet and to attend the Ivanti Solutions Summit in Grapevine, Texas, which is near Dallas, for anybody who's not aware of that. And really appreciate having that opportunity to be able to invite you as guests to get a different perspective as a future, I don't want to say a futurist, but as a future of work consultant, somebody that's always looking at the future to have people that are in the trenches, doing this every day, working with organizations, working with clients, working with employees. Wanted to get a different perspective because, I see things and hear things one way, but you're dealing with it on a regular basis. So I really appreciate that. Holly, why don't we start with you and just give a kind of a brief, we already did your bio, but give a kind of a, what do you do on a day-to-day basis, who you work for, and then we'll dig into the questions.
Yeah, sure. So I am the Chief People Officer for Jack Henry. We're a financial technology company. So basically, we provide technology for banks and credit unions or smaller FIs throughout the US. And I run all things people and culture. So everything to do with our people. We have about 7,000 employees across the US, and we are an S&P 500 company. So we're public based. Yeah.
Excited. Yeah. So you basically had a distributed remote workplace before.
We did. So we were like about 35% remote before the pandemic. Now we're about 82%. And so, we're pretty dispersed as an organization.
So yes. For people who say remote work won't work, you've been successful. You're still in business, right? Yeah, that's what I would say. Now I had a small business, but I went remote in 2004. I was in an interim role. We moved into a new office. And my employees, I was remote, and my employees were actually going to the office every day. And after after the lease was up, it wasn't after the pandemic. It was in 2007. We had to renew the lease, and we didn't need the space we had because I was never there. We didn't hold meetings there. We didn't need a conference room. And they said, "Oh yeah, we can work from home." So everybody went home and picked up their things, and one of them moved actually in one of your locations where your corporate headquarters is. She moved to Missouri. Yeah. Yeah. I sold my business 2 years ago, but I hadn't seen her in 12 years.
Oh, wow.
And no one knew we moved. No one knew we were remote. They still thought we were in that office in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So it can work. It can work. Yeah. Obviously, there's certain businesses that can. Mary, tell us a little about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm a leadership development strategist, and I am also the host of the Simplifiers podcast. Every week, we simplify one topic, either in work or in life. Talking about working remote, yeah, same. My teams have been working remote since 2014. I moved from Austin, Texas to Nottingham, England, turned the entire team remote when I did that. So yeah, early adopters to the remote working. Completely normal. And then, when the pandemic happened, it was like, oh, Zoom. Yeah, we've been using that for years now. So yeah, know exactly all of that.
Pretty interesting. As you mentioned, Zoom, I just wrote an article. I did publish it on LinkedIn. So if anybody's on LinkedIn, they can go up and get it. But it's something I've been saying all along is that despite the fact that so many people complained about Zoom and working remote and doing all those things, it was if we just rolled the clock back 10 years to 2010 and think about if the pandemic had happened in 2010, how would we have responded? Because so I went back and I did, and again, you'll all appreciate this because you're in the position of, gosh, as much as, well, you were already doing it, but for all these companies that maybe 2%, which was the average, 2% of their people were remote, that they went remote, is if you look back at the technology, we were still at, I think 2G, I think 3G just got introduced. People still had dial-up. There was no Zoom. There was I had a podcast way back then, and I actually interviewed somebody who had a startup in video conferencing. And I reached out to him just a couple during the pandemic and just wondered what happened to him. And he said they just couldn't hang on. Like 3 years into it, they just were burning money and they couldn't even open up. So again, sometimes it was somewhat fortuitous that we had these technologies, and as much as people complained about it, they were good. So anybody who wants to read that article can go up on LinkedIn, and it's on my profile, and just take a look back, and that's the good news. But let's start looking forward. So at the Ivanti Solutions Summit, which you guys attended, you were there for the 2 keynotes. So Jeff Abbott, who was the CEO, and I've been working with Ivanti for the last 3 years, especially with their everywhere work. So I thought that was a great title because really it's not remote. It's not working from home. It's not working from Starbucks. It's working from anywhere. It could be from a beach, a hotel room, a vacation home. It could be working from home. So it really is a variety of things, which opened up a whole other platform. But we also, their theme was, and it's progressed over the last 4 years. This is the 4th year that their everywhere work report came out. But also it progressed that it's more than just where people work. It's that flexibility that people want. So within that theme, we Jeff Abbott had given the overview. They just released the report that morning. So want to get your take on what were some of the highlights, and then Samantha Radakio, but she goes by Sam Rad, gave her a super interesting futurist report or a video and a talk. So let's go back. This time we'll start with you, Mary. What resonated with you most from what you heard from Jeff or Samantha? So I'm going to ask, and you can either answer them all at one time or we'll go back and forth.
Yep.
Is what resonated the most, what surprised you the most, and what terrified you the most? So let's start with what resonated the most.
So I loved being at that keynote. Holly, I'm sure it was the same for you. I felt like we were a fox in a lamb's den. Like we are surrounded by cybersecurity, IT engineers, and here are these 2 HR people looking at the same content and the same ideas with a different lens. And so it was really wonderful to kind of go in there and say, okay, well, tell me how this is going to change how we work from a people initiative point of view. How do we train our people? How do we develop our people if they are literally working from anywhere and at any time? So the question that popped up the most, not terrified, but certainly threw up a red flag for me, is if we're shifting to a way of working where people can work anywhere and at any time, how do people leaders create boundaries by which to touch base with their team and go, hey, have you completed that report that's due? Can I touch base with her at 10 o'clock at night on a Tuesday? That doesn't sound like a good idea to me as a people leader, because I believe in work-life balance and work-life harmony. So that was a huge kind of, we got to really navigate that from a people perspective, because yes, software engineers, they'll work around the clock. They get a ticket in at 4 a.m. The network's down. They're going to fix it, right? And that's normal for network engineers. But for everybody else, this is a completely different way of working.
I think for me, it was, I love just the focus on people first, right? And so we have a really strong people first culture. And then when we align that with focusing on our employee experience and maybe even automation, which I'm sure we'll talk about more in a minute, to really help our people be productive, I think those are the biggest things that resonated with me as I was listening to it. It was really something that we already try to focus on throughout this whole, I don't know, however long it's been since COVID started. We have really helped our leaders to say first how they can have grace and flexibility with their teams. And so not just focusing only on productivity, right, and getting the work done, but like, how can you offer them grace and flexibility? And so we said that over and over and over throughout, and we still do throughout this time. And I think flexibility is one of the values that when we think of our talent value proposition or employee value proposition, flexibility is one of our key values. And so I loved throughout the report how they talk so much about flexibility and how important that is, because I think that if we try to push that away, like, so push our people back to the office or something like that, we're going to have a revolt, right? Because they appreciate flexibility, number one, in all the surveys we do, everything that we hear back from our people. And so I think that was just kind of reassuring to me. Now, on the fear side, terrifying side, I think it's just a matter of, I think one of the biggest fears that everybody has related to kind of the dispersed work and work anywhere and all that is culture, right? And so they're like, hey, we have a really amazing culture. I don't want to lose it. I don't want to take that away from what we've built here for us at Jack Henry over the past 46 years. And so I think that we have proven that offering those things as leaders, the grace and flexibility, the really caring for your people, supporting them well, knowing them as humans and not, not just numbers or whatever, is really, really important. And so the focus that we have on that over and over has allowed us to keep our culture and even grow it in a lot of ways. And we see that even with our new hire surveys, they're like, the culture is amazing here. And so I think those are the biggest things for me that really resonated. Yeah.
Anything surprise you? Anything that took you back and go, oh, wow, didn't realize that?
Some of the stats did. So just thinking through kind of the mental health things, not that it's necessarily surprising, but some of the information around how vital that is. And I think we underestimate sometimes as business leaders how vital it is to really stop and think, hey, how are our people? How am I? How's our leaders? How is my peers? And how do they really feel? And some of those stats around mental health, I think, are fascinating. And I think it's something that we really need to pay attention to as leaders and as HR professionals.
That's so important. I had the opportunity to be there for the week. So I was there Monday and Tuesday, and we met with, I had the opportunity to participate in a couple roundtables, mostly analysts like from Forrester and Gartner and some organizations like that. I was the lonely representative from kind of the HR world. But it was really interesting because one of the questions, I was on one of the panels, one of the questions that first came up was talking about implementation and where things were and one of the concerns. And I don't remember if she was from Gartner or Forrester, but here, IT consulting. It really shocked me because right out her lead was, and this was how she phrased it, I don't know if we were going there. This may be out in left field, but I think it's the most important topic on the table, the mental health of our IT workers. Mm. And she just did she just did a dump on everybody for about 5 or 10 minutes. Totally unexpected from what was the biggest challenge in cybersecurity, and it was the mental health of their IT workers, which is incredible. And just a plug for one of the other podcasts that I've done, and I did this a few months ago, but Headspace we're just released a state of the mind, a workplace state of the mind. And I'll read the stat because now this wasn't in the Everywhere Work, but it certainly confirmed and even exacerbated where Ivanti's study was on a much broader scale, that they identified, or out of their survey, Headspace found that 77% of employees said that workplace stress has negatively impacted their physical health and personal relationships.
I'm not surprised. I mean, I think that there's been such if you zoom out and look at the macro economic trends, every company out there is driving business growth and trying to lean down as much as possible, which means that some teams have gone through layoffs, but they're still driving the bigger revenue goals, with fewer people. That doesn't surprise me at all. People are stressed and companies are trying to drive profits, and something's going to break eventually.
Well, and also, as you mentioned earlier, the boundaries, right? And so if we don't encourage our people to set boundaries themselves, so I just did skip levels with all of my employees. We have about 80 people on our HR team, and I asked each one of them about their workload and how they handle that, and they all admitted that it's them that doesn't set the boundaries, right? And so we all personally have to set those boundaries. And I think that's really important for us to do and encourage that in lots of different ways. Yeah.
I want to go back to you, Mary. Was there anything that terrified you or surprised you in that regard?
No, I've had my finger on the pulse when it comes to AI for the last 6 months or so, and so I subscribe to this incredible daily newsletter called The Neuron. I'll send you the link if you want to put it in the show notes. But they basically talk about the latest and greatest AI tools and features that are out there in the world. So I've seen quite a few deep fake videos and things that are being created right now that are wild when you think about it, because I think the part that is underlying a bit terrifying is just how AI is going to affect our presidential election in the States, because I think the AI video technology and the ability to replicate somebody's voice, and it's incredibly hard to differentiate what's real and what's not real, I think is going to create a system of distrust in the American culture. And I think that that's going to play out in the workplace as well. And I think that it's, from a leadership development point of view, having training on civil discourse. How do you talk about politics? How do you talk about trust in video in the workplace, and what is appropriate to talk about in the workplace and not? I think that's a hot topic.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on AI. I think one of the biggest things that I just spoke internally at our company last week, and it's just about the fear that people have around. And there was a quote that Sam Rad said, there it is. So transmuting fear into opportunity is the mindset of the future. And I think that's such a powerful statement. And so helping people to get past that fear onto, hey, it's not going to take my job or anything like that, and then moving towards really enhancing human capability. And I love just that whole aspect and that perspective that she talked about quite a bit throughout the keynote, is just really helping our people to understand, hey, how can I understand this? How can I learn more about it as a leader and as a person, and not just be afraid? Because the more you learn about things, just like you said, Mary, the more that fear goes away, right? And you're like, oh, hey, how can I utilize this in my everyday world, whether it's work or personal, to make my life better? And I think that's the biggest thing. That now, I will say the terrifying part a little bit for us is on the deep fake side. So we have had several instances where we've had not just deep fakes, but identity theft with people trying to get into our organization as an employee and get hired and get into our system. And so that, and I think that's something that human resource people, and I don't know how many people are listening that are human resource people, but I think it's something that we're not thinking about at all. And really saying, hey, what does our process look like? Because this guy, he was really smart. He got all the way hired into our system. He called and said, hey, my parents are sick, so don't ship my equipment to the address that's on my ID, which it wasn't really him, right? Ship it instead to Massachusetts because I'm here taking care of my parents. And they're like, oh, I'm so sorry that your parents are sick, because it's just not something that we as HR people would have the big red flag and say, oh, wait, why are we shipping equipment to another place that's not his home? And so we're of course now working with our fraud team to put our processes in place and say, hey, when is a red flag and how do you do it? But I think it's going to get harder and harder as we go through just this whole process of onboarding. And how do we know they're real? I mean, this guy passed his I-9, his drug test, all the stuff, right? And so that's a little terrifying to me. If I had to pick one terrifying thing, that would probably be it. Yeah.
Yeah. For those, I do believe that there's a link I'll put in the show notes to be able to give access to Sam Rad's keynote. But in case we can't, or you can't get that, is I found, and I'm deep like you, Mary, well, both of you, I follow this all the time and I've seen them. But when Sam was, home quarantined, like we all were in lockdown, now this is her world. She lives in IT, and she's probably a white hacker. She's able to create her 4 years ago.
Yeah.
She shows the video she created and then says, that wasn't me talking on the video. That was not me. And I'm sure someone who's expert in it could discern the differences and the quirks and maybe the latency, but it was pretty darn good. So I'm sitting there thinking, and I'm so glad you brought up the direction that you went, Holly.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking of, I've been in this space for 30 years in the HR space. And even before that was people submitting resumes that were fakes or they're exaggerated. I think it was probably still true, but I think at one time it was like 70% of resumes that are submitted have at least one lie on them. And it could have been their employer, why they were fired, how much they made. It could have been somewhat innocent to that degree in comparison to where we are now. But now we're talking about, even people would say, well, we do physical interviews because we don't trust the information that they send. But now, because we are in this everywhere work world and this flexible world, people submit videos, and we do Zoom call, and the availability of and the expertise that people have, where deep fakes are no longer just the result of white hackers in Russia putting this stuff together. It could be almost anyone.
Yeah, just a year ago, we had crazy things like their mouths not matching their words, and there was somebody like underneath the desk talking, and instead of them. And then we had examples of, I interviewed this person on camera, and they look similar to the person that I just had on my team meeting, but I don't think it's the exact same person. But now we're moving into, really quickly, it takes 15 minutes and free software to do a deep fake. And so you can literally, you don't even have to have somebody under the table anymore talking, right? And so that really is very scary, and I think something that we all need to very much be aware of so that we can protect ourselves and our companies. Yeah.
I want to get back to talking about flexible work, because we throw these terms out. So we've gone from return to the office, work from home, 4-day work weeks, and then we have this everywhere work, which really focuses on location, that it could be for anywhere. But flexible work is really different. And I'd like to get, especially from both of you who work with clients or within an organization, how you are shaping flexible work. Because I think so many people think that giving people off Fridays or having casual Friday is flexible.
Yeah. Well, I think the basis to successful flexible work or everywhere work is got to be trust. Bottom line. And I will beat this drum till the end of my days. You are hiring adults. You're not hiring children first. You're hiring qualified professionals that you have theoretically extensively interviewed, and to ensure that they have the skills necessary to complete the job. Then you, as a people leader, have to trust that your people are going to do the work. And that's not saying be laissez-faire and hands off and just go, okay, Holly, good luck. I'll check in with you in 45 days to see if you did the thing. I think it requires a different level of people leader training to understand, how do you equip and empower your hybrid or remote staff? Because it is completely different than the olden days of being in an office 5 days a week, right? You can check and track that a person's doing their work because you see them physically in the office. You walk by the water cooler and you say, hey, how's that project going? And you go, oh, yeah, I've hit a roadblock. Can you help me get through this? But that's completely different in the hybrid and remote space because you don't actually visibly see them. You don't technically see them clocking in or clocking out, potentially. And so the metrics of how you determine success is the output, not the time spent on the job.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think one of the biggest things that I heard in the keynote too, which I really, really love, is the idea of kind of fluid job roles and fluid functions. And so we're having a big focus on, hey, we're not necessarily focused on a job description and the actual thing that it says, but more on, how do we find solutions? What does the solution look like? So first discover the problem and then find the solution. And that could mean a variety of different roles all mixed into one, right? And so just trying to determine how are we truly flexible, not just on where we work, but also how we work, what the job functions are, what the roles look like, so that we can put all that together. And I think for the future of work, it's really important that we all take a moment and say, hey, what roles are not going to be here in 5 years? And then that we have today, right? And then what roles will be here that we don't have at all? And then how do we help our people transition to that? And it doesn't necessarily look like, hey, step 1, step 2, step 3, right? It's a process that you go through with the upskilling and the reskilling. And then again, that kind of, I love the term fluid job functions or fluid roles, to try to determine what does that really look like and how can we be productive as a group in that way. So yeah, flexibility in a lot of different ways, but radical flexibility, I think, is what Gartner calls it, radical flexibility.
And that totally resonated with me too, because I think old school, project management 101 is to put a RACI chart together, right? Responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed on any sort of project. And I think that you can still use those older frameworks and tools with a fluid team. It's understanding what one person's strength may be is another person's weakness, and how do you still create solid roles and responsibilities so there's no confusion. Sally's doing this and Charles is in responsible for the key decision on this. But playing to your people's strengths, project to project or sprint to sprint, that's where the key is. And I think we kind of get stuck in like, oh, well, Mary is only good at this, and so we're only going to put her on these projects and this specific job title. I think that it's very smart to move into a space of fluidity, just to, tap into your team's greatest strengths when you need it.
You are listening to Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization. We are here today with Holly Novak and Mary Baird. They were my guests at the Ivanti Solutions Summit, and we were talking about everywhere work and flexible work, getting many different perspectives, a little bit of where the future, some of the terrifying things, and some of the positives that will come from AI. We're going to take a really quick 1-minute break. Stay tuned. We will be right back.
Are your employees feeling stuck and just showing up for a paycheck? Is your workforce working harder to get back to normal than adapting to the future? It's time to help them break their addiction to certainty and develop a growth mindset. Developed by one of the world's top-rated future of work thought leaders, AQ Plus Mindset is a powerful tool to help your employees embrace change, adapt faster, and grow on the job. Conveniently delivered to any smartphone or laptop and easy to digest 5 to 10-minute lessons. Managers can sit back and watch employee attitude shift towards growth and innovation in just 30 days. Are you ready to help your employees thrive in this ever-changing, never-normal world? Encourage them to show more grit, resilience, adaptability, and unlock their potential? The journey to a growth-filled future starts with a growth mindset. Visit aqplusmindset.com or call 484-373-4300.
Welcome back, everyone, to Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization. We're here today talking about everywhere work and flexible work and how to empower flexible work. We've got Holly Novak and Mary Baird. They were my guests at the Ivanti Solutions Summit just a few weeks ago, and we're doing a kind of a rehash of that, but also diving a little bit deeper into what this means for everyone. Also want to thank everybody for being part of Googlization Nation. If you want to subscribe, you can go to Googlizationnation.com. And also want to thank Ivanti for being a sponsor of this episode as well. You can download the 2024 Everywhere Work Report at adaptabilitytoolkit.com/2024 Everywhere Work. We'll put that in the show notes so it's a little easier for you, but you can download the free report that we're talking about today. Holly, you were, I think you said that Jack Henry was about 40% remote before the pandemic.
We were about 35% remote.
Okay, 30 or 35%. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't a huge leap. And again, many organizations forget that their sales teams were pretty much remote. Even if they had an office and they came into work, they were working remote. In fact, if you were in the office and you were a salesperson prior to 2020, you weren't really working. that hard. Everybody sort of forgets that remote work won't work. It actually did. But again, so you went from 30% to 70%?
We're at 82%
82%.
right now.
Okay.
Yeah,
So huge leap. So there's a whole group of people that had to go. But what other changes have you seen other than more people working remotely? How did you integrate? How did that change to a more flexible work schedule, or adding that? And then also, what about managers? I mean, so there's a lot of managers that used to be able to walk down the hallway and see their people, and all of a sudden they're on a screen and they don't have tabs on them all the time.
Yeah, sure. So the first thing that I think I'd like to say is that we were pretty dispersed before, then the pandemic happened. And then I think at that point, because everybody did go remote, we started hiring in just all the places, right? So we had certain office locations, but then we got even more dispersed than we were before. And that's not a bad thing necessarily when we're all remote. However, to keep our culture, I think you do have to have some face-to-face in-person time. And so that costs money, right? To bring, if you're very dispersed all across the US, and then now you have to come together as a team, of course, that's more budget. And so it's not that you can't work remotely all the time, but to have that true connection, you do have to see people's faces, like in real life, every once in a while. And so I think what we've done over the past about year or two is identified hub locations where we can have some true connection events where we bring people together, even if they're not on the same team, but they're actually seeing human faces that they work with. And then also focusing our recruiting efforts in those areas. And I think that not only helps a little bit with just the connection, but when we're thinking about flexible work, I feel like the more engaged we can have people, and just like Mary said earlier, the trust is vital. So without that trust, and a lot of times you can't really build that virtually, you have to really be connected to somebody to have that. And so we recognize that from a manager standpoint, as you said earlier, a lot of managers don't know how to lead dispersed teams. They don't know what that looks like. And so making sure that they have the resources that they need to understand, hey, have one-on-ones with your people, talk to them. How's their family? What's going on in their lives? And really build that trust and that connection with them. And then that's how they're going to succeed as a team. So that's what our biggest focus has been. I think it's working. I think our culture is still good. We still have great engagement scores, all that stuff. But I think it's got to be intentional, and that connection has to be intentional kind of all the time, right? And especially important moving forward.
Are there any? I know one of the objections that often comes up is that you can't collaborate, or collaboration doesn't work as well remotely. And there's certainly, and I'm involved with a strategic vision now with a client, actually a volunteer group, looking at the future vision. And certainly the being together works much better than having a few people on remote. That's very challenging. But I don't think, my belief is it's not because of the location or the distribution of people, is that we're just not comfortable with collaborating remotely.
Yeah. But I have some ideas on that, because we've had to overcome this many, many times. And what we had learned at the Simplifiers, so we did executive coaching in the L&D space. So we were working with executives and C-suites all over the world. Again, I was based in England, but my team was based in the US, Canada, and the UK. You know what we found was the simplest solution for collaboration and brainstorming? Google Docs. And let me just talk this really quickly. We built a system and framework to lead teams through postmortems, through brainstorm sessions, through quarterly retreats, fully remote on Zoom. And we would have a Google Doc that everybody has access to, and guided questions every step of the way. And so when you say you got 10 people on a Google Doc at the same time, and you ask a question, what was the biggest lessons learned from this last sprint? People can start typing into the doc itself, and then, give it a 7-minute timer, and then, have a discussion after the fact. All of a sudden we have one primary document that has got everybody's feedback in it. One place, no one's typing up meeting minutes. It's all there. And so you're capturing that data and that feedback very, very quickly in order to brainstorm that way. And, I've used lots of virtual whiteboard tools like Canva or Miro or things like that. And they're good, but they're sort of janky because you have to like zoom in and you have to like scrunch and pull and expand. Like literally get back to basics. Google Docs are the best collaborative tool to brainstorm when you're in a virtual environment.
And I think one of the key things that you say there is you're either all virtual or not.
Yes.
And I think that's the hardest part is when you're trying to do a hybrid meeting where you have some people in a room and then you have some people virtually. And that most of the time does not work, right? Because you forget the people that are virtual or whatever. But when I feel like you can collaborate if you're all virtual, just like you said, when it's much harder. So with our like creative teams or idea teams, our engineering teams, when we know, hey, you need to get together and develop a product or whatever, get together in person or all be virtual and don't try to do it hybrid. I think that's one of the biggest things. And tools help, right? Of course, Google Docs, all of the tools are really important.
And that was such a great suggestion. And again, I don't want to bring politics into this, but the trial that's going on in New York right now, the fact is that there's no people, there's very few people in the courtroom, but they're using a Google Doc to distribute the news.
Wow.
As it's ongoing.
Yeah.
So it's like, how are they getting this news if nobody is in there and they're not allowed to talk and they don't want people on their phones? But they're using a Google Doc. So all these reporters and all these people that are in there are documenting what's going on. So it works. It works. And for, in most cases, it's free or inexpensive and it doesn't require a lot of technical expertise or training to be able to do that. Again,
don't overthink it. Yeah.
Yeah. I still, going back to my story in the beginning, if you roll the clock back, it'd be 14 years at this point, but in 2020, if you rolled it back to 2010, what were some of the devices that we had? Some of those things were available then, as well. We're just not comfortable using them. But I'm so glad you also brought up about this hybrid when you have said, well, at least we have some people here. The problem is that really makes it challenging. And I got steeped in that when I'm teaching. And you'd have some students there, and you forget the couple students that are on the Zoom call, and it's very challenging, to be able to do that. So again, I like the idea is like, hey, if everybody can't be in person, then maybe virtual is actually probably a better solution. 100% virtual than 50-50 or 60-40.
Yeah, and even just go, even if you're in the same building, just go and be virtual with everybody else. Yeah.
And I think that it's really important. It sounds very simple, but there are pieces that are necessary to make these kinds of meetings super impactful. Is a bit of training on how do you facilitate those kinds of conversations, and making sure your people leaders, have built the Google Doc before, tested it, and easily can show like, this is a very simple way for us to do what we need to do, rather than be like, oh, where do I log into? Oh, this seems complicated. And then there's like strife in a meeting and you're on mute, right? You just want to make it as simple as possible for people to adopt the tool to achieve what it is you're wanting to achieve. I did want to go back, Holly, you talked about like hubs for the workplace. And I feel like this is so important. And I think this is the evolution of, in tandem with everywhere work. I think companies have to be really smart and strategic about changing how they utilize their physical office space. And, bigger organizations are going to have workplace planners and a healthier team that is doing that. And smaller companies are going to have a facilities manager or somebody. But I think that it's really important that HR, like your business partners or your organizational development team, are in those conversations, because how we work in a physical office space is changing entirely. And to look at it as a hub, a collaboration space, a place we come to for key meetings when we have to be face to face to, like we said, brainstorm or make key decisions. It's no longer the place, in my opinion, where I have a dedicated and assigned desk, where I have an office or 4 walls and a door. I mean, I used to have those many, many moons ago. But then the concept of hoteling in an office space, I think there's still a lot of opportunity here to make that better, because what hoteling feels like, where you sort of check in and you get a desk for the day and then you take your stuff away, can feel very cold and a little bit sad, because you're taking your picture of your dogs and your family every day and putting it in a locker
Putting it
place.
out. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that there's something there that the bottom line is, bring your HR team into those conversations with facilities and workplace planners. Talk about the psychology behind what it feels like to belong in your workplace, and how we use this physical office is incredibly important.
I love that. And so for our company, we've done what we call a workforce evolution team. And so that team is made up of several people from human resources, from facilities, finance, our marketing team, communications. So all these people coming together, so that so what we're doing, just like you said, we're revitalizing each of our hub locations so that they are more of a collaboration space. So we call them connection hubs. And so that's what we're doing. And so, yeah, every week or every other week, we have a meeting with the workforce evolution team and say, hey, how do we continuously build that connection? How do we make sure the facilities are what they need to be to bring people together? And what does that look like? So yeah, I totally agree. I think really being intentional about how do people truly belong and what does that look like and feel like. Yeah.
I had a buddy who worked at Nike a few years back, and that was specifically his role, was workplace planning and strategy of how to use spaces. And they did a study where they did heat maps, and they just tracked where people worked from as the day progressed for a couple of weeks. And what they realized was that sometimes people in the morning would put their heads down and focus work when they were bright and awake, and later days they would move over to stand-up desks. But they realized that their workforce was migrant. They were moving throughout the day depending on what type of work they needed to do, either heads down work or group collaboration or phone calls. And I think that there's a lot to be learned from that, you can also track and create a space that is actually highly effective for your type of workplace. Because the truth is, no one can get any work done if you are sitting next to tech support or a call center. It's just like mentally impossible to do that. So thinking about what your people need to do their very best work.
Love it.
We are getting to the end really quickly. As I said, these always go so fast, and usually as we get deeper into it, there's so many more questions that I have. So hopefully we can do this again. But I have two final questions, and then we'll get into our lightning round here. And this sort of brings it back into what we talk about with Ivanti and cybersecurity, and they talk about all the vulnerabilities that exist. So let's bring it home to HR. For about 6 or 7 years, well, it's actually 7 years at this point, that I published Recruiting in the Age of Googlization. And the first half was about the future, and the second part was, what's recruiting going to look like? And I was on the circuit and talked at a couple hundred HR conferences over that time. And I really wasn't in the HR tech world, but in HR, we talk about the HR stack. So we have these talent management systems and applicant processing, and it's like, oh, we need this. We need this system and this system, and it all gets patched together, which in the world of cybersecurity is a nightmare, because every connection becomes a vulnerability, even when we have an enterprise system, because there's add-ons. It's like we'd like to add that on, and sometimes it's a third-party vendor. Are you hearing, or within your organizations, is there conversation about the cyber threat or the vulnerabilities that created by this patchwork quilt of technology to automate, to kind of automate that space? Is that a conversation? Because I know most of them I've been in, it becomes, oh, we'll bring IT into that. The integrations work fine, but all those integrations create a risk.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, this is where you have to have strong cross-functional partners. Cybersecurity is not my zone of genius. I am aware of it, and I know it's a huge issue to, but that's where your people need to be able to have these kind of across-the-table conversations. I mean, I just saw the Gartner report from April 30th of the top emerging and disruptive technologies to watch. And the 4 key areas that they're talking about is that there's technology that's going to create a smart world, productivity revolution, privacy and transparency, and critical enablers. And everything in all of this is, how do you keep your customers' data safe? How do you keep your trade secrets safe? Because there's so many incredible tools in AI and beyond that are coming into the marketplace and fast. And so that's where you really have to have strong partners that can help guide you as well. And then I can come to the table and say, okay, well, here's how this affects our people. And here's what the training we need to ensure that our people are compliant to the cybersecurity practices and guidelines that we have set as a company.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think it's all about the partnerships. And thankfully at our organization, we do have very strong, just like the example I gave earlier about the fraud and the onboarding. So we're partnering very closely with our cybersecurity team, with our fraud team, with our IT team to make sure that we're going through all of our processes to assure, like, hey, where are those gaps? Where is it that somebody could kind of squeak through without being noticed? And so I totally agree. I think it's all about the partnerships and making sure that, number one, we're aware as human resource professionals, hey, what could happen? And then how do we partner well with our internal folks to make sure it doesn't? Yeah.
Yeah,
totally
that's great to hear. And I know during the conference and during during almost the rest of the conference as well, they talked about IT and cybersecurity working together, and they're not completely separate functions either. And I always wanted to have them add that human resources, because is you can have all the technology in the world to keep people safe, but if people don't use it or don't know why they're using it and not using it properly, and then they find workarounds to get around that, it's pretty crazy. So yeah, that's a great conversation. Last question fairly quickly here. I'd like to ask this because sometimes we didn't cover something and you said, boy, I wish you would have asked me this question. So I'll ask each of you, is there a particular question you wished I would have asked, and then quickly give an answer to it? So, Mary, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that from everything that I've read and heard, and Sam Rad definitely reinforced this in her talk, it's just the focus is on human connection. No matter all the whiz-bang tools and technologies that are coming out there that help our people work more effectively and be more productive and do the great work, I think that there is it's incredibly important from a leadership development and talent development point of view that you are focusing on emotional intelligence training for your people. Because if you think about it, people that are in Gen Z are entering the workforce right now, maybe getting their first or second jobs, went through a pandemic through very key times where they should have been learning in-person, face-to-face social skills and didn't. And so, don't assume that people know how to communicate or how to be a good listener or the etiquette of how to be in a meeting and not do 3 things on 3 different devices at once. And I'm trying to talk to you, but you're looking at your phone and you're typing on your computer and you got a tablet open, because that's the mentality of a lot of Gen Z and even Gen Alpha. They're multiple screen kind of people. So I highly encourage anyone that's out there listening, put focus, priority, and resource towards emotional intelligence training in the year ahead.
I totally agree. And so what I was going to say is similar. Sam Rad did say to focus on what she called fundamental human skills, which I think is definitely emotional intelligence is one of those, but making sure that it's not just emotional intelligence, but also communication. It's also like, how do we work? How do we how long does it take you to answer an email? Like all those kind of fundamental human skills that we need to help build into our people is really important. And then the other thing that I think is really important is making sure that as we work through this idea of Gen AI and all of this stuff that's happening in the future, there's so many things that Gen AI can do for us to help us to be more productive, but humans are important, and just making sure that we focus on the importance of our people. Without them, we can't succeed as an organization, right? So humans bring empathy and inclusivity and creativity and ethical judgment and the ability to navigate social interactions that AI can't do. And so making sure that we help our people realize that, and then help them utilize their tools in ways that help them to be most effective. But yeah, I totally agree on the fundamental human skills as well. Both of those things. Yeah.
So now for one of the fun parts of the show. This is the closing. We talk about the lightning round, and it gets to know you a little bit more personally. Holly, I'm going to come back to you first. What's your go-to music when you need to kind of just break away? You put the headsets on and you turn some music on. A song, a band, type of music.
I'm gonna say like 90s, 80s rock music. That is my like go-to music. If I just like want to like zone out. If I want to like focus on work, I'll generally have like classical. I love Lindsey Sterling, like all those types of music. But yeah, it just depends on my mood. But yeah, if I want to sing along, it needs to be something I can sing to, like 80s rock. And then if I just want to focus, Lindsey Sterling. That's what I would
Is there a particular group on the rock side you go to?
No, I mean, I like Bon Jovi, Journey, all those things. I'm old. So there you go.
You're well, watch who you're talking to.
Yeah.
Cool. Mary.
Oh, I immediately know who I'm going to tell you. Ryan O'Neal has a band called Sleeping at Last, and it is the most magical, amazing music that he makes. He has a anthology called Atlas, and he has made songs for every lunar eclipse and any astrological occurrence that has happened in the last 4 years. He's made a song for the most recent solar eclipse. He also has made a song for every Enneagram type. And I'm telling you, his music is magical. It's been the undertone for songs in Twilight, Grey's Anatomy, and a whole bunch of TV shows. So if you hear his music, you'll recognize it. Sleeping at Last.
Cool. All right. Next question. If you could meet one person, past or present, and have a sit down with them, who would it be?
Oh my goodness.
I mean, I think the obvious is Oprah Winfrey, probably, or maybe Jesus. Like, I think
I was going to say Jesus.
Both of those, yeah. At a dinner party would be fascinating. Mine as well.
Yeah.
I
think I would go with Jesus. Yeah.
So that's an interesting comparison. Oprah or Jesus. So,
either one.
So, yeah, excellent. What's the best way to get a hold of each of you? Holly?
Probably LinkedIn for me. Holly Novak on LinkedIn is probably the easiest way. I check it more than any other way right now. Yeah.
And Mary.
Yeah, same. LinkedIn is the best way to get a hold of me directly. But you can also go to thesimplifiers.com. That's where you can click to listen to our podcast and just get connected to all the things that we're doing in the world.
Thanks. Well, we went a little bit over today, but I really appreciate the opportunity for one is to meet you, to be able to share the experience with you, but also to get your feedback. And I think we could have probably, the three of us, gone on for quite some time here. There's so many other questions that we didn't get to. So hopefully you'll be willing to come back and we can continue this conversation at some point. I want to thank Ivanti for inviting all three of us to be guests at their Ivanti Solutions Summit. You can you can download the 2024 Everywhere Work Report at adaptabilitytoolkit.com/2024 Everywhere Work. Frankly, if you go to Adaptability Toolkit, there's a pop-up that'll show up there too. So you can do that as well. And you can download the report and hear a little bit more about some of the things that we didn't get to talk about today. We want to thank everyone for being part of Googlization Nation. And remember, don't let the shift hit your plan.
Thanks for watching Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization. Be sure to listen to the podcast and follow us on YouTube.